How did residential estates kind of get started in this particular part of the industry? Because we kind of touched on it is a subset, let's say, of the main property strategies that most people might come across, things like straightforward buy-to-lets or even development type properties. It's a relatively newish or maturing kind of market. So how did you guys get started?
Well, I wasn't here, but it was a bit of a fluke, really. We had quite a lot as a residential sales and lettings company, which is how we started. We had a lot of our owners had apartments on Chester Racecourse, and somehow a relationship was formed with a couple of companies who were sort of looking for short-term lets for contractors who were coming up.
Yeah.
In my head, I think I knew who it is, but I don't want to quote who it was. It was a major bank, and so in fairness to the CEO at the time, well, still is, but he sort of approached his owners and said, "What do you think to this? We've got people who are willing to pay X amount a month for a shorter term let," and it worked. And the vast majority of those people have never gone back to doing anything different.
Yeah.
And that's where it was. And then so we carried on doing that. And then sort of 5-6 years ago, when we started going down the investment route and trying to apply all our knowledge, so we have the knowledge of sales and lettings, we have the knowledge of short-term lets, which that wasn't part of the scene then. I think it was really part of the scene when we met 4 years ago at Rivergate, I think it was, in Manchester.
Yeah.
We then sort of thought, well, there's a market here, because we sort of looked and we were speaking to our landlords, and when we had landlords who'd never really looked at investing, but because they took this option on the apartments they had, which was in Chester at the time, they said, are there other apartments we can buy that can do this?
Yeah.
Because they were seeing a greater revenue coming through. Now, I mean, for them, they bought at a great time because prices would have been low, etc. There would have been no competition whatsoever, etc.
Good combination of a good asset purchase and also very little competition in terms of the rental.
Yeah. So they started buying. So then we started doing that, and then we got talking to developers. And in fairness, I think 4 years ago, even we didn't know half of what we know now. I mean, I mentioned to you, I worked on the other side. I've worked on sort of the management side in that as well, and we now know what you need in place legally to get it done. You know, so back a while ago, there was no such thing as a lease with a short-term let allowance or a non-restricted allowance. Let's put it that way. So it was just
touch on there. Do you mean when you were looking at a development? So you were looking at a proper, like a location or a development to buy, and those developments didn't necessarily have the allowance for a short-term let. Okay.
So some would actively restrict it.
Yeah.
But some would not mention it. In fact, some were very grey. But we'd be then speaking to the development team saying, can we do it? Oh yeah, that's no problem, that's fine. And then coming across a problem later down the line.
Yeah. So
then we started being more proactive and approaching developers at a certain stage saying, right, okay, we'd like to do this on this because we think this will work. Do you have any objections to it? And it's just a matter of putting a small clause in, that's all. You know, it's nothing groundbreaking.
Yeah.
So then we know that when it comes to the finalisation and the completion of the project, that we've got that option to use it, and it's worked very, very well for us. You know, it takes a little bit of education. I think sometimes when we're speaking to people, it can get overcomplicated. You know, when it's not that complicated.
Yeah,
it's a matter of numbers.
Especially if you've got lots of existing housing stock, whether it's the houses or apartments that were built a number of years or so ago that hadn't considered short-term lets.
Absolutely, yeah. Historical leases, and you can't change them. So, you know, you get that. I mean, I can't comment on what a lot of the ones that you see on these public forums or public OTAs are, but well, I'm not going to comment. But you know, at the end of the day, we know what market allows it. You know, and we do everything we can. And like I say, it's no additional cost. I never want people thinking they pay more because it's allowed us to do this. It doesn't. It's not about that. It's just about trying to give our investors another option.
Yeah, it's the same asset. It's just with the understanding that the property, one, is suited to it, but two, is allowed to kind of do that. Because there'll be plenty of properties on the likes of many of the portals and platforms out there that are being rented as short-term stays that aren't allowed to be because of the restrictions in the lease, or you have certain areas now, obviously, in the country where they brought in kind of restrictions in terms of how long these can be kind of rented out for. So this is an ever-changing dynamic in terms of the rules, let's say, that people have to kind of play within.
I think one of the main ones is that a lot of people rent out rooms in their home houses.
Yeah.
So you would have thought that that would be against what they were allowed to do when they took out any sort of lending on that property.
Yeah, potentially.
So but yeah, so we can't worry about that at the end of the day. All we worry about now is now going, and now we've transformed so much over the last 4, 5, 6 years, and we're now in a position where we control what we sell. We control what we offer.
Yeah.
And there's always a reason for it. We've always got evidence to show why we think that is a good place to go and why this will work. We don't put it on everything we sell, you know. And if we do put it on, it is for a reason, you know. And like I say, we'll cover that in a bit. But yeah, it's. I'll say, I mean, without going into detail, it's just saying, right, okay, instead of A, you've got A and B.
Yeah.
C, and then you've got the choice of managing it yourself as well. But trust me, having seen what goes on in that, that's a full-time job.
The management, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and you need to live next door to it, and because you get calls out at 11 o'clock at night, etc. You're dealing with people who maybe had one or two too many, who are looking in a letterbox for the keys. Seen that one. I weren't allowed out to see them. So you're dealing with things like that, and I think that's one of the other worries that people have sometimes about short-term lets. There are now pretty big companies out there that look after your apartments, that have got the logistics to do it. We try and look after a lot of our investor apartments, but we can't look after an apartment that's more than 40 miles away. It's impossible.
Yeah, it's an important. So this touches on just straightforward buy-to-let management as well. I think having people that have the expertise within that particular niche or skill set to manage that property type, strategy, location makes most sense. And I guess what we're looking at here as well, within the structure of an investor coming today to want to look at buying into this particular part of the industry, a property that could be suited for either a buy-to-let or a kind of short-term let. They have the ability now to choose locations and properties that are set up with that view in mind. So they can be considered that, and they can also look at it and have a conversation with their broker to make sure that lending is an option. They can have a conversation with the solicitor to make sure it's kind of the right leases are set up. They can have a conversation with you guys, management, to make sure the management is kind of in there in place. And they know that all of those key kind of criteria are there fundamentally kind of ready to go. And again, I think that speaks for the fact that the market has matured in that direction as well, rather than what historically might have been certainly 20 years ago or even kind of longer, and even to an extent sort of 10 years ago, possibly even 5 years ago, in many locations where the properties, the management, the infrastructure just wasn't set up to have that type of property type catered for.
You can dot more I's and cross more T's now. It's not as much a hunt, want of a better word. People will have figures to show of the demand, etc. I mean, we've always sort of said, first and foremost, it's still about the investment. At the end of the day, we're an investment company, so our job is, what everyone wants in a property generally, certainly on a residential side, is to buy a property for everything to be covered with what's incoming that goes out, to grow a little bit of money, and then if you want to carry on building a portfolio, then it's to release money. Everyone wants that, and again, these properties are exactly the same. It's the location that's important. It's the investment itself. It's just that you do have that option to maybe get a little bit of a higher return than what you did before. But if you're perfectly comfortable with a normal return, take it. My piece of advice to everyone, well, it's not everyone, dependent on the investor and what my relationship is with them, how I know what their portfolio is. It'll always be, certainly first-time investor, just get an AST for the first 6 or 12 months. You're not going to not get rich by losing out on what would have been made. But let someone else who's more sort of aggressive, because they're in a position to be more aggressive, let them run it on an STL, and then let's see what their figures are. And then we can say to you after 6 months, right, that's what they've got. This is what you've got. What do you want to do? And if that difference is minimal over the first month, okay, let's get another AST for another 6 months.
Important point there that it's worth kind of touching on so it's not missed as well. When it comes to the short-term let kind of market, we've seen more recently, I guess certainly, lots of properties come available in the market where people are offering them out of short-term stays or short-term lets. They're selling them with that kind of intent in mind. And investors like it because they feel like, especially on paper, the returns look much better, the rental income looks much better. But when you dig into it, maybe the location isn't right for a short-term let, or the underlying asset itself is problematic for whatever reason. Maybe it's not the greatest property or the greatest location, or there's problems within the development or something else that's kind of being masked by this potential, let's say, to run as a short-term let. So you kind of touched on that. Fundamentally, it's an investment first. That's important because it's not considered as, right, is this the right property? Is this the right kind of location first and foremost? And then in addition to that, you can run it as a short-term let. I think you probably miss out on lots of key things that you need to do to consider, is this the right choice?
You're not buying it just for a rent. No one's ever really got rich on rent, have they? And it's the second part. And also, I'd also urge anyone, whether they come to us or they go through someone else, it's very easy to check if something can be done on short terms, so if you see something, and then it is easy. We both know this industry can be a little bit loose sometimes, and people can advertise something that isn't there, and it's just, okay, let me see the lease. And whatever it may be, you can do it, and we know we can, and I believe the reason why we're pretty unique in this market is because we've had them years of experience of running them as well. We know what we're looking for. It's not just a matter of putting something on a piece of advertising paraphernalia saying you can do short-term lets when you get it. You don't want to buy anything just because it does short-term lets. You need to buy it because it's still a good investment first and foremost in an area that's up and coming with a nice bit of regeneration, whatever it may be. It's just then, because if you've got an area that is regenerating, then it's actually tailor-made for what we're looking to do with it. With contractors and a new workforce. So again, they all fall hand in hand at the end of the day with their own particular ways of growing. Because when the asset grows, your demand will grow. And it just, it's like a moss and rolling stone. It'll just pick it up as it goes along.